The relationship between the United States and the Soviet Union changed from 1952 to 1960, and then 1961 and 1968 in two ways. There was the military and strategic, like weapon strategic aspect of it, and then there was also just the general relationship. So in terms of military and like weapons, under Eisenhower in the first period, there was a lot of, they called it massive retaliation. So in a largely defensive and cautionary political or foreign policy, and in the spirit of containment, there were nuclear bombs, really, which it was like, if you guys do something, we'll do something equally as destructive. And it was sort of them holding each other at the throat. And there was a lot at stake, like in the Hungarian Revolution, 1956. The United States wasn't involved because that would mean nuclear war, and there was way too much at stake. After 1960, under Kennedy and later Johnson, the policy wasn't defensive, it was aggressive, it was belligerent, and it was also kind of idealistic. And what they did was they changed it to a flexible response, where instead of having nuclear warheads or nuclear bombs, where there was a lot at stake, instead it was conventional forces and mobile military, things that you can use at a moment's notice, and also the CIA had a big part in that second time period. And then that translated into the Vietnam War later, but there was a lot more flexibility in that. And also the general relationship changed in between both nations. So in the previous time period under Eisenhower, things were kind of going well. The Cold War was still in full swing, but it was like there was the Geneva summit where nations met together, and they said, in really the spirit of trying to lighten the burden of the Cold War. And Khrushchev, who came to power, he denounced Stalin's war crimes, and he said he wants peaceful cooperation with the West, and it's called the Geneva spirit, where everyone was really optimistic about the Cold War, or the outcome of the Cold War. And also things like Camp David, where after the Second Berlin Crisis, where Soviet Union said, American troops, we need them out of Germany or out of Berlin. We invited Khrushchev over to the United States to Camp David, and he said, yes, I'll agree to negotiate, and I'll agree to have a Paris summit in 1960. And they also invited Eisenhower to the Soviet Union. And the Paris Conference was in 1960, which was the turning point in between these two time periods. And in that year, there was a U-2 incident where an American spy plane was caught over the Soviet Union, and that really shattered the relationship, the budding relationship, really, between the two countries. Khrushchev, basically, he dissolved the Paris summit, and he said, this incident is hostile, it's aggressive, and there's no way that we'll be able to negotiate after this. And really, the relationship changed under Kennedy to something more secretive, more like hostile. Things like Cuban Missile Crisis, where both nations were really unwilling to back down. Also, the Paris Summit falling apart, and Bay of Pigs, where Kennedy sent really to invade Cuba, a military invasion of Cuba, and that set off the Cuban Missile Crisis. And so there was a lot more aggressive policy in that second time period. And the relationship really deteriorated after really the U-2 incident, and then also under Kennedy.